Yeah, so thanks everyone for coming. Obviously end of a work day, so thank you for driving either locally or a long way here. Much appreciated. And welcome to the people who I'm told are Skyping in or something like that. So hi. Don't know where you are, but welcome. So yeah, we're gonna have a hopefully an informative and fun session here. But before we begin, obviously something that's quite important to most outdooretters, which I'm assuming that's sort of the audience I'm talking to, but I'd obviously like to acknowledge the country that we stand on, the traditional owners and the custodians of the land. I pay my respects to the elders, both past and present, and we will have a look, hopefully in the film, at why that's a very significant issue within outdoor education as well. So welcome everybody, my name's Jodi, this is Beau, and we'll just start with the film. What do you reckon?
I think so.
We're at Little Desert National Park, which I'll be honest, when I turned up to work this morning, I actually had no idea where it was, didn't know what the closest town was, and had no idea what the scenery would be like.
The Watchabalak, Wurgai, Jadawadjalai, Jadwa, Japagalak people welcome you to the country. And they've been here for, well, tens of thousands of years. When you Google Little Desert National Park, what pops up? You know, we're looking for the political history of the place, whatever.
And I think this is the same story that we get around a lot of Victoria is you Google it and it does pay respect and attention to the Indigenous history, but sometimes frustratingly in quite a generic sense. So when I researched the area, it's very much that it was a traditional place for hunting and gathering, which of course is true, but it would be nice to know a little bit more about how that took place. Looking through the VCE Outdoor Ed textbook, their write-up about Little Desert National Park is a picture of it that says this landscape is largely unimpressive to humans. And I guess that it's all about finding that value in it. But do we have to find value in it? Can it just be conserved for the intrinsic value? Does it need to be worthy to us?
The elders of the National Park movement in the late 1800s in the US, they would not have thought, I think, of places like this. They were thinking of grand escarpments and huge ravines and Grand Canyon type places, or Yellowstones, where it seemed like Mars, you know, it seemed like another planet. This wouldn't have been on the radar. And maybe that's indicative of the 1950s, this place being preserved post-war, when it was still half intact, and why not, you know? And because it had a couple of species that were really quite unique. They were the great raging torrents of waterfall and the scenery from the beach. It was the smaller things, so it was more subtle.
You've still got the major stakeholders involved. You've got the government initially giving away and clearing the land for agriculture, and then you've got the conservationists, the bird watchers, and the orchidologists. Yeah. Really holding an interest in the area and saying, well, hang on, let's preserve some of it, and let's stop clearing it for agriculture. And that happened around the 60s, when people were starting to really take an interest in conservation, because you can come out here and do things like bird watching, flower spotting, bushwalking, and people had more recreation time, and they were prepared to fight for that.
I like the park. It's a lovely place to camp. Went for some of the walks today. The loose sand's a bit of a bugger, but the scenery's really good. There's a few kangaroos and emus around.
And what are you doing here, mate? You're washing your feet.
Yeah, about to wash my feet before I get into bed. We started to do last year. We started doing some of the towns, and then we realised that going to the big camel and the big koala, not necessarily good fun, so we started doing the national parks, both Queensland and New South Wales, and now Victoria.
Good on you, mate. My most powerful experience this morning is the smell. This is such a different smell to 4 or 5 hours away. It's dry earth, it's desert. You know, it gets less than 300 mil of rain here, and so I'm impacted by just how the dryness and the Australiana sort of thing that's sort of flowing through my veins. It doesn't feel like home.
No.
And yet it feels like Australia, but it's so different. And I think that's a really powerful thing for students to come out and feel and smell that difference to home. Well, the research says that the facilitator, the leader, the guide, they are the key sort of intermediary between what a student takes away or not from an experience. So I see us as flawed. You know, I don't know this place from a bar of soap. I know and we can rest on our laurels now that it exists because someone cared for it 60 or 70 years ago and for thousands of years to protect it to what it is now. I think our key flaw as a guide and as an outdoor educator is not knowing these places well enough, and the student who can figure that out very quickly, that we're just here as a generic loving nature guide, but I don't really know much about the joint. So we bring this generalist kind of love of the world, but without an intimate knowledge of this place whatsoever.
And yet it's those people, it's the locals, it's the people who take notice of the small intricacies that are ultimately the ones who create and save areas like this. Because without them, this would have all been farmland. That's my understanding, is that there was the big push in the 60s to continue to clear the land and continue to graze sheep and continue to grow the wheat. And if nobody had have taken an interest in the birds, then nobody would have formed a lobby group and nobody would have stepped up against the government and said, actually, we need to create a national park. So it's those locals taking the interest in the smallest parts of the environment that time and time again has been what has saved areas like this.
We're in a really amazing spot here sitting at the campsite because just through here is open farmland. So we're right at the cusp of this big, huge, I suppose, open woodland behind us, which stretches for right through to South Australia, but right there is country full of kangaroos and sheep and wheat belt. So, we're sitting right at this sort of precipice at the moment.
I think it really is about striking that balance between, can we preserve this area because there's the mallee fowl, but can we also have that primary industry happening right next door?
Yep.
So, Beau, it seems like we've stumbled upon something pretty cool here.
Oh, this just means so much to how the world functions, you know. This is an old disused piece of agricultural equipment, an old ripper that would have been used for cropping, towed behind a tractor, an early tractor. I don't think this was towed by bullocks or anything, but it's amazing. We're in this big cleared farmland of internal Australia. There's emus in one corner, kangaroos in another, and then you've got a wind farm over here. So we're in between agriculture, the future, and then our preservation world. You know, let's put that aside because there's so many of us now in the world. We need to clear land to create food. And then we've got this new source of energy out here in these giant wind turbines. It's fascinating. We're kind of at the corner point here. We love the place. We're preaching to the choir. How do we bring a bunch of Year 9 or Year 10 kids out here for a 5-day hike and get them to really resonate with the place without the big sweeping views and the raging waterfalls? So then it's a sense of perception on our part. So we have to come to the party with really gun facilitation to get them to care about these smaller sensory things. So what they've done here, which is really nice, they help out the guide, and this is one of the few national parks I've seen within a couple of kilometres of the car park. There's little naming badges on things, which is just a nice help. You know, so I know then within the first 2 kilometres that that's a black butt and that's a myrtle honey and that's a tea tree of some description, and it has a name and an identity, and then they seep away, and then you're out there and you know what these things are. That's a nice start.
The more I look at it, the more I fall in love with it as a teaching resource, because I just look at the information board and it touches on the Indigenous history in the area. It touches on the land management and the conservation in the area. They've even got fire in the desert, so it's looking at the ecological history of fire in the area, which is run by the Friends of Little Desert National Park. So you've got the volunteer groups involved as well. You've got right down to management strategies. There's pest signs everywhere about rogue bees, and there's 1080 put down for the foxes, and there's all of these management strategies at play that Parks Victoria have put in. So yes, it's a long way to drive, and we're only 80 k's from South Australia at the moment, but as an educational resource there is an abundance of information here that will engage kids.
You're right on the doorstep of these 3 or 4 eras. I think that's amazing. The preserved world, the agricultural world, and the future over there in the form of wind farms.
So guess neither of us knew too much about Little Desert. Neither of us had been there before, but it popped up in the VCE outdoor ed curriculum as a potential case study for people to use. And we thought, well, if we're going to be teaching about it and recommending that people go out there, we may as well go and visit it ourselves. So that was pretty much how the idea was born. We then jumped in a car and, yeah, it was a good 6.5 hours to get there from here. So it's not close. In case you don't know where it is, not close. Yeah, we did our best to try and capture some of the typical, I guess, images of Little Desert and of the surrounding areas as well. And yeah, we did that to go and check out the area and see it as a resource, but also to just try and bring about some questions and some conversations that might be useful to anyone who wants to use or visit the place, but also to VCE outdoor ed teachers. So we weren't quite sure who we would get along tonight and who would be interested in a film like that. And so we haven't put together a great big, long PowerPoint or anything like that, because we kind of want to tailor a lot of this stuff to the crowd. So that's why we've been writing things on the board. We've been going with our areas of expertise. And so we thought, if you're really into the curriculum and education side of things, feel free to ask us some questions relating to anything that you can think of or anything on the board. But if you're more interested in sort of the, I guess, outdoor ed theoretical side of things, go ahead and ask some questions from this board. So we'll really go with whatever it is that you would like to talk about, whatever has popped into your mind as either a result of watching that, or because you just have questions about outdoor education, or particularly in the new study design, the role of the new dot points surrounding, a lot of it is surrounding politics in outdoor education. So,
great intro, Jodi. I don't have a mic, so I'm going to try and be as close to this little duva as possible so that it can hear my voice, which is probably right now. You hang on to that one, mate. Some context as to Little Desert. As Jodi mentioned, it's part of the VCE study design now and the curriculum. And we almost were derailed for our trip. It's the start of the semester, lots goes on. And so we were able to wedge in this experience last week in this manic sort of taught in the morning. We all jumped in the 4-wheel drive and we headed up to Little Desert. Google said it was 4.5 hours away. No worries. We sort of coffee and a wee halfway. 4 hours 45. Piece of cake. 7 hours later, we roll into Little Desert National Park. About 7 coffees later, and calling into the info centre at Horsham. And so we were only actually at Little Desert for 3 daylight hours, and we had to sleep there. And yet that experience of being at Little Desert for that night, and those 2 meals together, and smelling the place, and wandering around the place, and playing with a bit of old farm machinery, and seeing the gum trees blow in the evening breeze, was brilliant. And there was a point 2 weeks ago where we thought, no, let's scrap it, and let's create this presentation based on what we can find in the library, what's on park notes, and we'll just rattle off stuff about national parks and Little Desert in general. But we came back completely loaded, even from 3 hours of daylight and an overnight sleep. So what I'll talk about, whilst Jodi will focus on education and curriculum, Jodi is our context of that, is that in a sort of crude way, I'll teach most of the sort of broader philosophical outdoor education concepts and environmental awareness, and then Jodi sharpens that knowledge of our students into the curriculum of VCE outdoor and environmental studies for methods as a discipline area. So I think we've got some nice sort of talking points here. I'll keep adding to this, but I've left half of my board open because before we begin, and I'd like to sort of sharpen my response to you folks and make it a discussion, is that why are you here? As in, why did you come to this presentation? What was it about the little title, or the fact that there was food, or the fact that it was available after work? I don't know. So what was your curiosity to be here at this session? It could be one word, it could be a sentence. Why are you here? Ben?
Politics.
Politics. Can you expand on that?
Well,
because
that was the most intriguing part for me. Was how are you going to link outdoor ed, the curriculum unpack all of the politics in play and teaching kids about politics. That was intriguing for me.
That's a great question. How do we link this idea of politics to teaching it? I think more the question is how do we unlink, or how do we pull apart what's taking place in the world to make it seem relevant to students? Because what is not political? Everything is politically charged. My hairs are standing on my arms just saying politics and getting impassioned about it. Because crikey, that experience, there's nothing of what I see, there's nothing that I'm not experiencing that can't be pulled apart in some way, shape or form via politics. The very simple one is to think, yes, there's farmland, there's forest, there's our four-wheel drive and there's a drone and all of these complex things that make those things function because they're things, but it's the more subtle things that I'm fascinated by. So, all right, Ben, because I know you're a great thinker, sharpen it up a little. What else about politics do we really need to unpack with a national park? Let's think national park. And Little Desert, particularly, of what you've seen of it. Have you been there, mate? No. I hope to think too, visually, that we've shown you a little bit more of Little Desert than not having been there. If we didn't go there 2 weeks ago to show you this 10 minutes of hearing those ambient sounds, seeing those colours, seeing what that kind of gum tree looks like in a gentle breeze. What would you say is more poignant then? I'm only ganging up on you because I know you're completely capable.
Can you ask me another question? Sure.
What's the title of this presentation? Don't kid yourself, weak.
Don't kid yourself or your kids. Outdoor education is deeply political.
Good answer.
So I suppose we can start with ourself. We need to start with our self-politics. And I think to teach politics to kids, we need to understand our own politics. I'm a product of my hippie father and my gardener mother, both lovers of the world, both very hard left in many respects, and came from the post-Second World War, total baby boomers trying to revolt against the world of war. So I understand that, but it's taken me years to understand that. And I know that my lens of the world is very much based on that. So in some respects, my craft as an outdoor educator is to try and teach that in students and for them to understand their politics and where they came from. I'm not sure, I was supposed to ask you a question, wasn't I?
I'm just going to jump in on that one, Beau, as well. I know when the new study design came out, the first thing I did as soon as it popped up, I was really excited and a bit of a nerd. And so read through every single key knowledge point, trying to find all the similarities and the new inclusions in the study design. And much to my surprise, almost all of the new dot points revolved around politics. Finding out what one of the key knowledge points now is to understand the policies of both major political parties in Australia, of understanding that Little Desert was created through largely a political argument, and it was the Liberals really wanted to be re-elected at the time and ultimately gave in to the conservation groups and created Little Desert. So I know I then did the whole taste test of, okay, out of all of the people I know teaching BCE, are people happy or are they unhappy about this new inclusion of politics in outdoor and environmental studies? And I had a really mixed response. Some people were rapt and some people didn't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. And fair enough. Politics, what are we told when we're kids? Like, don't talk religion and politics or something. And then here we are having to teach exactly that. Personally, I was rapt when I found out it was included, because it gets back to this very notion that we all can actually influence the creation of things like national parks. So coming up to elections, our vote matters because we can get politicians to pay attention through groups like Environment Victoria, through the Wilderness Society, because it's happened time and time again. So I think when you're working with a group of 17, 18-year-olds, it's such an exciting space to work with if you can get them to understand that. So getting them to understand that if you take an interest in politics, if you take an interest in a specific environment, and if you care about that cause, your vote 100% matters. If you go down to your local MP and you say you will not get my vote, if you don't do X, Y, and Z, they will listen because they want your vote. And if you can really get the students to understand that it's not just about learning a bunch of policy and what happened in the past, but learning from those past movements that resulted in national parks, that their vote actually matters, I think that's super important when you're educating future voters, 17, 18-year-olds, really getting ready to make their vote count. So I think a bit of passion from the teacher is a great way to actually engage the students and really making them understand that their vote is the most powerful thing they have.
Yeah, so I imagine, Chantal, I'll come to you. You've got a question from online?
Yeah.
We'll get to that for us too. So I'll just readdress this, our title, to go back to the sort of point that everything is political. Outdoor education is deeply political. It wouldn't work well or wouldn't sound all that appealing to the principals of the world and the curriculum makers of the world if we said outdoor education is deeply canoeing or outdoor education is deeply walking, which it might very well be. I think it's really just an idea that we've got to come to terms with the fact that everything is political, so it's how we address it. I think that's important, and be quite bold about that too. It's not a dirty word, it's everywhere. It's like air, isn't it? Some questions, Chantal, from the cyber world.
Okay, thanks, Beau. I've got a few actually that are coming on, so I'm going to try and keep up. We've got Vicky, which she's the first one to ask her question. She's here because she wants to learn more about outdoor education, but more specifically about how to organise the outdoor education according to the politics.
Excellent. All right, well, I'll take that one. I think it goes more towards education and curriculum. So using Little Desert, we'll unpack it in its entirety. So obviously it's got its own, sorry, not obviously because you don't necessarily all know the curriculum, but it does have its own key knowledge point within the curriculum. For those of you not familiar with the VCE study design, basically it's all broken into areas of study, units, and then key knowledge points throughout that you have to tick off as you go along. One of them that you can do as a case study or as a place that you've visited is Little Desert National Park. The main things that come up surrounding it and how would you structure that? There's a lot of educational resources and areas and aspects of the VCE curriculum that feed back to Little Desert. But the main reason that the curriculum wants you to look at it is why and how was it created in the first place? What conflict arose and resulted in Little Desert? So brief history is that the Liberal government at the time under Henry Bolte, had a bridge named after him, they wanted to continue to expand the agricultural land around the Little Desert area. Obviously Little Desert National Park did not yet exist. So they wanted to continue clearing the land and developing the agriculture. The local group started to say, well, hang on, we've noticed that the mallee fowl, this weird looking bird, we've noticed that it hangs out around here and we actually think that this area should be protected. This little conflict between the Liberal government wanting to develop the land and the local user groups wanting to protect the land started to make the news. And Melbourne news outlets all picked up on it. And all of a sudden there was a bunch of environmental groups in Melbourne jumping on board as well, saying, well, hang on, that's not right. The government shouldn't be taking all of this land for agriculture, we need to preserve some of it. This was end of the 60s that this happened. And all of those those environmental groups all joined together. And they said, all right, our collective voices will be heard. And very conveniently, there happened to be a by-election as well. And the Liberals lost a very safe seat in the area, and they put that down to the fact that they were still pushing for this agricultural expansion. Meanwhile, these environmental groups have all ganged up and they held protests in the streets of Melbourne and said, definitely not, we want you to create a national park. And so they did. They created the national park, but beyond that, they also created the land Land Council.
Land Control Council.
Land Control Council, which is now known as the VEAC, which is another very important part in the study design. And what that meant, that creation of that group, meant that there was an independent body to now assess whether an area is viable for conservation or agriculture. So that was a really important thing to happen in Australian politics, that the government recognised, well, hang on, maybe we have a vested interest and the environmental groups definitely have a vested interest, so let's get somebody that's independent to actually start assessing these places and seeing whether they're worth protecting or not. So in the broad context of the curriculum, that's what the VCE study design wants you to know about Little Desert National Park. But if you were actually to go there, you could tie it into almost all aspects of 3-4 Outdoor Ed. Obviously, you can look at the Indigenous history of the area. You can look at, it's huge in terms of its, it's the geological stability, everything from Unit 3 and geological isolation.
No, you're right.
Oh, good. Excellent. I'm forgetting things now. And then the renewables are right next door as well. So that debate comes into play. You've also got all of the agriculture, so that's your primary industry. You've got tourism in the area, and you've got designated conservation areas. If you're wanting to link it to Year 11 VCE Outdoor Ed, you've got all of the management strategies, although that's in Year 12 as well. I think, does that sort of answer the question? Like, there's many, many ways that Little Desert can link. If you take your students there, then you can unpack all of that with them. It doesn't matter that a lot of, the renewable energy stuff is in the second half of the year. It doesn't matter because they can still draw back to that original experience at Little Desert. So hopefully that answers that
Just
question.
the last bit of that question. If you head over with the mic, mate, by the time you get there I can answer it. It's an underwhelming place for a student, I imagine, Little Desert, compared to the Prom or the Grampians or Manarapiles. It's a hard sell for, I imagine, an energy-charged Year 9 kid that is just as worried about what the girl is thinking of him or his best mate or what they're wearing, because there's not this big bold landscape to blow their heads off. So that's the difficulty of it too, that yes, this is laced with all sorts of wonderful things that are political and charged in the curriculum, but it's a bushwalk on offer in a flat landscape. So it's difficult, I think. Yeah. What's that next question?
Thanks, Beau. And Jodi, that did answer Vicky's question. I've got another one here from someone saying that they're here because they know very little about the park and its history. It seems like a smaller campaign than Peta and Franklin, and they're keen to learn what all the fuss is about. Is it in the text simply because it demonstrates a shift in early perceptions from resource to conservation?
Good question.
Great question.
Jodi,
Yeah, that was really good.
You can
Wow,
take that.
okay. Hopefully I can remember all the parts. I think I'll go 2 parts to this. One, I think it's a great, yes, everybody knows of the Franklin River campaign, and it's a great story, and we love seeing Bob Brown, tying himself to things and on a raft, going down, getting arrested many times. We love the story of the Franklin River, and it is really engaging. So yes, it's hard to move away from that and have a look at Little Desert, which, as the textbook says, is quite unremarkable. Although, by the way, I loved it. It's actually really nice and very chilled out place to be in. But yeah, it doesn't have the glitz and glamour of the Franklin River campaign. But I think a great reason to study it is, one, it's in Victoria, and the other 2 case studies are Lake Peta and the Franklin River, so both based in Tasmania. Important parts of our history to know. But with this one, it's in Victoria. You can go and see it, you can touch it, you can smell it. Even if you can't take your students there, they can go and visit it on a weekend or school holidays or anything like that. So you can actually encourage your students to get active and get outdoors. And I think it being based in Victoria is a real strength and reason to actually teach this case study as opposed to others. The other part of that is why is it included and what's all the fuss about? The fuss is about the fact that it was actually a really successful campaign. And because the Land Council or the VEAC were created from it, that's a massive deal and has helped the creation of further national parks. I think there was only 13 national parks when Little Desert was created in Victoria, and now there's something like 57. I could be getting those numbers a little wrong, but that's about the scale of it. So the fact that it was a successful campaign where environmental groups came together and that the government not only listened, but they created that independent body was a massive win and reason to study it, even though it's it's a not very well-known national park. You say Wilson's Prom, and I would say almost every person knows it. You say Little Desert, no one knows it. Again, all the more reason for it to be included in the study design and actually get kids engaged with it. And to me, that ties back to that story of them understanding that their vote matters and that they can join an environmental group and they can protest against things and they can be active citizens. Get them excited about it. Any more questions from online? Yeah, okay, come on back. Oh yeah, if anyone else here wants to say, you can wait.
So the response from that person that asked the question was that they weren't aware VEAC launched from this campaign. So it's helpful, and yes, it is only the Victorian example, so impressed with your answer. So we've got Sarah online, and she said she wanted to attend this seminar she's intrigued to see the politics behind outdoor education and the curriculum more specifically, and wanted to see Beau and Jodi's insight into the VCE curriculum and their solutions to this and their strategies to enable students to understand this and the environment in conjunction with the political side of things. Long question.
I'm going to start with a philosophical response to that. If I'm thinking broad world view and where I came from and why I think what I think and see what I see, I would say that the politics and the advocacy for outdoor places, if that's at the heart of the question, why do we care for places and why would we go there, why do we care? I think it really then stems from having great experiences and connecting to place. So it goes back to place-based education and just having experiences in the outdoors, and good ones. Climbing trees, swimming in rivers, feeling the sand between your toes, all of these, and a million of those things over time. And I think then the politics takes care of itself, because all of a sudden you care for somewhere, and then all of a sudden you're on a picket line because something's happening to this place. I know I was far more willing to go and spend a busy piece of my schedule or just a time within my week to go and talk about hunters on Snake Island within Nurramunga, because I've been paddling there for 15 years and had experience with a whole bunch of people here, deep, meaningful experiences. And so the politics just sort of took off from having experiences and that sort of log of fieldwork.
Yeah, I would second that. As soon as you've taken students to the actual place itself, I think that they're far more willing to engage with all of the curriculum side of things, because they recognise that they can see it, they know what it's all about, and they know why it's worth protecting. Some of the strategies I've used to engage students in the past, if you've already got students who are interested, obviously a debate, always fun. Because you can get them really fired up and they can be yelling at each other, and that's fantastic. We want that. Not that we necessarily want them to behave like politicians, but we want them to understand the passion behind it and different user groups. So I think obviously debate, I like to get a bunch of YouTube clips up as well of politicians actually giving speeches. If you can't go to the area, then definitely showing images of it so that they can try and actually connect with it and feel it in a certain way. Going down to, so Environment Victoria was formed because of Little Desert as well. So that was all of the environmental groups that came together. They formed one big group. I can't remember their name, it was a bit funky. It was like Bush Advocate Group or something. And later they changed their name to Environment Victoria. They still exist today, and okay, I'm a member, fine, I'll fess up, I'm a member of Environment Victoria. And you can go down to any of their hubs, I guess, and meet the volunteers and chat to them about any of the issues. So they're now campaigning about saving the Great Barrier Reef, they're campaigning about better renewable energy targets to help with climate change. So actually get the kids in touch with people who are passionate. If you don't really care about politics yourself, the kids will see that and they will know that. So get them in touch with people who actually do care about it, and get guest speakers in and or take them down to places. When you go to Little Desert, get the park ranger to come and actually give you a talk. We, again, on our really long drive to Little Desert, we stopped at Horsham and dropped into the information centre there. And again, none of us we had not been to Little Desert before and knew nothing. Dropped in, walked into the info centre, and it was like this perfect thing. This lady, remember her name?
Gail.
Gail, sure.
Maybe not. But
We'll call her Gail. And she comes over to us, oh, hi, can I help you? Yes, we're off the Little Desert National Park. Well, her face lit up. I'm a local, that's where I'm from. And straight away, I started to get excited about Little Desert. I wasn't necessarily, I was excited to be going out and being on a bit of a road trip, but I wasn't particularly excited by what I perceived Little Desert to be. And all of a sudden she's there, like bouncing and bounding at me, and I'm thinking, well, this place has got to be pretty good. And she's giving me lots of brochures, and she's talking about the malleefowl, again, a bird I'd actually never heard of, and showing pictures and going, look at the orchids that you can see there. And we walked out of the information centre, and I couldn't wait to get to Little Desert after that. So I think really tapping into your key resources and trying to get people with an existing passion for either renewable energy or whatever it might be in the study design. Find someone who's out there protesting about climate change. Find a politician who's totally anti, who doesn't believe in climate change, and get them to come into class, or get them to, or find footage of them saying that. So really just, that's my advice, is to find passionate people or passionate resources, and most people will get fired up by that and feel some sort of emotion.
No doubt there's some more questions. Are there any questions from the floor before I raise one of my other dot points? Are we tracking? Okay.
Thanks for that. I think the question is, would outdoor ed ever not be political? And you've sort of alluded to that. In the 80s, Wolfdean Dam was a controversial issue up in Queensland, and the kids got right into it because they understood not only is it politics as in political parties, but it's about power and privilege as well. So whether it's between you and the environment or you and somebody else. But there was a lot of scope that we could do even in what we were talking about more as what you might describe here as mundane bushland. There's nothing special or huge vistas that you talk about. But it is about understanding responsibilities and rights and what happened with Indigenous people, what happens with governments, but also in the work of just hanging out with the rest of your class for 2 or 3 days. And, all sorts of things start happening around group dynamics and some of the challenge activities, even challenge by choice, that's political. So I think there's a lot in outdoor ed that is political. Even how outdoor ed is situated educationally is political. And I thought maybe that's what this was going to be a lot more about. But I think there are many levels that you can work at: government, personal, and also curriculum. So, yeah, my question is, when is it not political?
I suppose I tried to open with that exact sentiment. So then the question becomes, what areas of policy or politics do you want to focus on that's going to have some sort of resonance with your class, with your cohort? And I suppose that has to be contextual, going back to place-based education or age-based education, context of the class and where you're going and where they're at, I suppose, aiming it at it. I know I was deeply affected by the Wilson's Promontory hands off the prom movement of the late 90s because we visited it and they positioned it perfectly for VCE year 11 and 12. And in some respects, that's why the emphasis is off the prom now, because it's bubbled away and it's back on the places like Little Desert, which can reveal new light to the same kind of politics. So I would say that context is very important, and to understand that context, which I often stuff up. And even this, I must be getting used to being at a university to critique myself in the film. Thinking that it's great to have these name tags of trees out there in the park. That was all good and well, but they were the common name and the Latin name and no Indigenous name. And I didn't realise that until seeing it. I think, Beau, you should have noticed that. I should have opened up to another context. So yeah, I think context would be my answer to that, Lisa.
Yeah, I think it's a really valid point, and I don't know, maybe it's not a really great example to put forward of myself, but I used to really like to get my students fired up about issues within the school as well, and realise that a lot of the issues that they were studying as a case study of groups that had got together and fought the power, that they could do that within a school context as well. So I, again, probably shouldn't say, but I ended up getting my students to sort of basically form a group and start inadvertently protesting in the school, asking why we didn't have solar panels on the roof. And one of them got dramatic, and there was almost, she was tying herself to a tree, but that's okay. The point was there, and it got across. So I think helping students to understand that potentially this is sort of quite a narrow curriculum, but that it can be applied to context within their life as well, and bigger issues. So that idea of the power structure and challenging that is a great thing to come out of these sort of studies. And making it, again, localising it and saying to the students, is there something in the local community, or is there something within the school that's bugging you? Because it would be hypocritical to say, let's study these things, but don't ever challenge anybody at school because, principal knows best. So, I sort of encourage little mini anarchists. It's another way to maybe engage students and get them to understand the politics.
Not all national parks have such a great line at the main campsite, or one of the main campsites, like Little Desert. And you saw it with some of that drone footage there. And I'll talk about the drone footage and visions and how I think this is really powerful in telling stories as well. But Edge Places and Shock, I don't so much get that at the prom anymore. They've covered up the waterworks and the sewage treatment and the diesel generators behind Tea Tree, and it's very unseen. You wander around in this sort of somewhat oblivion at the lovely scenery around it. Whereas camping at that campsite that we were at, you really are. You've got this shocking reality of a parched earth. It was concrete hard, the wheat fields that had already been cropped. And then you've got this sort of semi-used area of campsite that would have been grazed at one stage and is still trying to repair itself. Maybe we're helping a little bit with some replanting and whatnot, and then we wander off, and within a couple of kilometres you really do feel like you're in an ancient landscape. So that transition was lovely. Very teachable, very accessible, other than the sand maybe for some people, but it was an excellent sort of edge place to explore these kind of different worlds. Do you want to address that? Any questions, folks? Percolating to the surface, Chantal?
And then I actually have a question.
This one's actually an experience question, Beau. Experience is such an imperative aspect of learning, which is coming from Sarah. Why is it then that schools are so limiting of allowing these activities to take place?
Great question. It's $1 million question. There's some faces in this crowd that would be able to answer this question better than myself. But from a university perspective, because I don't work and I don't come up to log jams within schools anymore because I'm not there, and I know it exists. As far as a dedicated, impassioned person wanting to take outdoor education programs, or just camps, or just 2 hours in the park, and the overlays and the resistance to some of those things. From a university perspective, I think there's an awful lot of misunderstanding of what can take place through experience still. And I think there's a great challenge in trying to consistently push that wheelbarrow of experiences are so powerful and not a young person, and any person's life. Not necessarily adversity, not necessarily risky, but certainly different. But more than that, it comes back to that sense of perception again. And how do you make this seemingly mundane landscape resonate with a Year 9 kid that wants to be on a screen? It's bloody hard. It's really hard. And so, as far as how do we have the advocacy of experiences within schools, and how do we make that more accessible and transparent? I think you have to make them good. I said that about 20 minutes ago. They have to be really positive experiences, because ultimately that will win out. If they are wonderful, positive experiences done well, and there's learning that occurs that is both accessible and is just unconscious, that's win-win. And then you have to try and create a narrative to that, to translate that to the people that are the power brokers. And that's the hard part.
Perceptions again, just a lot.
Yeah.
We've got someone in who's got... I think it's getting the perceptions of those people who do have the ability to allow those experiences to happen in school, because a lot of outdoor ed perception of like an outdoor experience is not necessarily seen as being conducive to what is needed in an education. So by changing the perception of these experiences being something that's really important, that in turn is going to obviously have schools wanting their students to be experiencing that. And you do have some schools that obviously have people who are in those higher roles that do kind of understand that, and also unfortunately it's a lot of the time it's monetary as well, being able to have the the ability to take kids out and not be kind of affected in that respect. But yeah, thanks. Perceptions.
Yeah, I think I'll finish off my response to that question of the school issue with the top and tail approach. You see your little kinder kids and your 2 and your 5 and your 8-year-old, busying themselves doing nothing, seemingly, in the backyard. They're off eating all sorts of things and climbing over everything, having a wonderful time. We slowly beat that out of them, and by the time they get to the potential of a CEO level, there's that next potential. And so we've often discussed at conferences and whatnot, let's take out the power mongers, let's take out the people with power that can influence these, the deans and the principals and the head of faculties, and let's take them on an experience and show them the positive world. And let that infiltrate from top down. Otherwise, we continue with that 8-year-old climbing trees and doing wonderful things, and we do it in stages, or we just give them that freedom, and it's coming from both ends of the spectrum. But yeah, there's certainly a movement towards taking people that hold positions of power into these experiences to let it do the talking, and we can just shut up and we just facilitate. We just get them there.
Yeah, I think ironically, I guess maybe the BCE study design actually taps into this whole idea of perceived risk, and we're a massively risk-averse society in Australia at the moment. And the media loves a story about an accident in the outdoors or something tragic happening. They love it. And they maybe love's the wrong word, but they definitely force it down our throats every night in the news, that you're learning the different ways that you're going to die very quickly. And so I think it's really hard then when you say you want to take somebody rock climbing or abseiling, for a school to go, great, that's a very safe activity and I can see all of the educational value in it right away. So I can understand how we've got to this particular place where schools are resistant to outdoor education. But again, I think being the passionate teacher and as Beau said, taking out the people who really make the decisions and letting them understand the difference between real risk and perceived risk, and letting them see the benefits of... It always frustrated me that when you had to list learning outcomes and you had to list all the ways this was meeting the curriculum, that there is no room in there for the evidence of how friendships are formed. And that's not something that I think should be undervalued. Sit a kid in a maths class or any classroom for 6-8 weeks of term and they barely know the names of each other. Take them out into the field for one day and they've got shared stories and laughter and best mates. We were just out on the weekend with the first year students at this uni, and before they left, they were reluctant to talk to each other. They still didn't know each other. They were strangers. It's only week 3. And by the end of the trip, you couldn't shut them up. They're all chatting away, having laughs, having fun. And no, that's not necessarily a written curriculum learning outcome, but that doesn't mean that it's not a super important thing that happens in the outdoors. And I think if you can sell that idea to schools in as many ways as possible, and taking them out and letting them understand it and feel it for themselves, it's the best we can do, and we can just keep trying.
We're probably only about 10 minutes away from wrapping things up. We'll get you folks to give us some feedback on these lecture series. We want to do a lot more of these from Monash. I think they're a really great resource for you folks and a really good impetus for us to gather together some thoughts and get some like-minded folks together. But I might just address one more point of the board, talking to the vision through experience. And Jodi, do you want to pick one last one to finish off on?
I'm gonna piggyback mine off yours, because I'm gonna front load your chat by saying I'm gonna draw back to the curriculum once more, and say that the newest inclusion in the VCE curriculum is that all students now have to do a journal as part of their assessment. And there are flaws with that, because there is no universal way that is being assessed. And so it is very hard to compare your students against students all around the state. And why wouldn't you just give all of your students full marks, because nobody's watching? And great, you can help them boost their ATAR a little bit. Not that we want to be dishonest, but that's what I'm getting at. There's no actual written formula for what the journal needs to include. However, a lot of companies that will sell you outcomes, or SACs rather, they've started putting out ideas for what students can use as a journal, either in the field or once they get back, as their reflection on what they have studied while in the field. And it hurt my soul when I read one the other day. I thought, is that really the best that we can come up with, of a kid to take a picture of something and write a handful of dot points that match the curriculum, move on? And that's our journal. Take a picture of another key knowledge point, write 3 dot points below it, move on. And I just thought, wow, that's such a dry way of representing an experience. Is there a better way that we could be doing that? And are we, I know it's a risky thing to say to a VCE teacher, but are we willing to take risks and allow the students to do something like make a film? I know if I was a kid and I look back on a film like that, if it was hitting all the key knowledge points, and I'm getting ready to study for my exam, I'd rather watch 4 films of my trips that I've done in the outdoors and use that to remember key knowledge points than I would of essentially reading a test. I think it's a way more engaging way of doing it. So I'll ask you about that at the end, but yeah, Beau, if you could. You're the film guy, so definitely turning to you for thoughts and experience on this one.
It's really difficult. I'll just tell you a small case study and use myself as the case. I recently handed in my PhD, and well, it was last year. So being postdoc now in this sort of world of what took place is really quite reflective. I was very angry about 2 years ago when, try as I might, I could not convince Monash and the people that would essentially grade or help me grade or examine my thesis would not take on the idea that a film series could be embedded within text. Yes, Beau, you can do it. You can create an hour's worth of vision, small episodes, a feature film. You do as you please, mate. But it can't really be part of the examination process. It will not be passed or failed. And so I still handed in my 87,000 word thesis in the end, and so my knowledge was synthesised and handed on to someone else through words. It sort of rocked me a little bit that this neoliberal university would not take on such a thing. Other faculties will within this university, but Monash would not. And so what we're confronting now in outdoor education, like every form of education, is the world of screens and the world of online learning portals. So I know Buff here, what do you guys do with your phones when you're in the outdoors? What's going on there?
There is a two-tiered way of going about it. They're not used a lot, actually, in terms of experiencing the environment. So there's some trips where they're totally away, and there's other trips where, for safety, they're used told to be turned off in packs, basically. Technology I have implemented. You might want to hear about that later.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to see what you do with the iPhone has revolutionised, and all the other kinds of smartphones have revolutionised how we do or do not, I think, experience the outdoors. It's kind of scary, and yet I know that I'm bloody reliant on this thing too. I can't remember the last time I turned it off. It's warm now, and it's nearly always warm. It's doing something. So I understand it and I get it. I get screen culture. I also know of the potential of this as a filmmaking or as a device to record experiences or to pass experiences on. Just like a good book, just like a poem, just like a great song. And so I think our difficulty, and I don't have any answers really, is that the idea of something like a video journal or a song or a poem being used as a form of assessment after experience or through experience is poo-pooed within, I think, the world of higher-ups, because we're really scared of the subjectivity of it. None of us are experts, maybe as poets or filmmakers or artists, and so when we accept it as a form of assessment, how the hell do I mark it? So I get that too. And so maybe that's our next form of literacy, is to create streams of objectivity through subjective forms of assessment. I'm not sure how you go about that. The consistency thing.
It's like a poem, then others a video, and then you're trying to be consistently amongst all. It's just.
So it happens for VCE English. Like, you get given a prompt, but every student's going to respond differently. So you then have to be able to ascertain, well, okay, this child is given an average grade, this child is given, an A+, when effectively, they might it might be either a different style of writing, it might be that they missed the prompt entirely. So I sort of look at it as if it can happen in English and in an English context, why can't it then translate into outdoor ed? Why can't we respond in similar ways and let every child express themselves differently and still grade it effectively?
I completely agree. You're still talking text though, which we've had for hundreds of years, and it is our medium for assessment. And so we're not there. Screens are very new. I did this degree at Monash University, an outdoor education degree, without Google and without a phone. And that wasn't all that long ago. We now have these new forms of medium to express what the heck took place. I think we're sometimes boundary pushers in outdoor education because we want to keep heading away and we want to go and do these things that are very out of classroom based. So maybe we can help that.
Can I say something? Sorry.
Sure.
I had a student last week after coming back from the prom. She quoted something in a group task. It was 15 years ago, we were jumping on our phones to escape the world. And now, 15 years later, we're escaping our phones. We're going into the world to escape our phones. So hopefully you can find some time to turn your phone off, mate. And the way that I run that, I have in the past, not at VCU, but at Year 10, made a journal entry totally tech-based. My assessment was totally not up to par, right? That's one thing that lets me down. But what happened, the creativity and the narrative from students was fantastic, and it is possible. And from hearing what happens in English, it should be. The thing, and I think across health and phys ed is probably the same, the assessment side of things is probably what has to be generic, so that then other things can be created.
Yeah.
That's just my take on it.
Yeah. That's a really good insight. I'll keep working on Monash. You keep working on Rosebud.
Yeah.
We'll get there.
I think I hate assessment. I hate it with a passion. I was asked once to, the reports that go home at the end of each term or semester, and for Year 9 outdoor ed, I was supposed to give a kid a grade for rock climbing. And I went, that's ridiculous. I'm not going to give them an A, B or C for how well they climbed a wall, because it's ultimately an irrelevant skill. It is not about whether they got to the top of the rock climbing wall. It's about how they supported each other in doing it, and were they encouraging, did they give it a go, did they face their fears. So no, I don't want to give them an A or a B based on whether their rock climbing skill, because I don't care. Like, it really doesn't matter. And it can be hard to communicate that, particularly in a school context where everything seems to push for assessment and grading all the time. And so I acknowledge and, yeah, definitely on board with saying that it's a very hard thing to do. I wish there were no assessments, but that's a whole other issue. I think one of our other biggest downfalls as educators and as outdoor educators is sharing resources. I think we're really bad at it, and people are very protective of the resources they create. And I think we should do far more forum sharing of great ideas and great resources. So if you've come up with a winning idea for how to get kids to do a journal in the field that's meaningful and gets great insight, why not share it with the rest of the outdoor ed teachers in Victoria? Because we'd all love to know. And you know, you're building and creating, because once I've got this formula of how to do a great journal, I might then be able to transfer that into how you do that in VCE as well, or how you make that accessible. So I think there's a real downfall in sharing of resources, and I think that's probably simply because there's not really a forum for it. If you are on Facebook, there's the VCE Outdoor Ed Teachers page, and there's often a few links and resources shared on that. But I think on a grander scale, we need to come together as a community and start sharing some of this, and stop having to create, you know, when I Googled Little Desert, the only things on YouTube are people getting bogged in their four-wheel drives in Little Desert National Park. That's all I could find. Maybe I'm just a really bad Googler, but yeah, that's all that's there. So, you know, why not go out and create some resources like this? Why not make some films on your trips as well? Not showing kids' faces, but why not make some resources that can be shared amongst us all? And I think we can actually help each other by trying to do some of that and really get some visually engaging stuff that we can all use.
I think we might essentially wrap up. We've got some feedback form that we'd love you folks to spend 3 minutes on your wonderful screens giving us some feedback. And then you've got to put your eating shoes on, because there's more sandwiches. If you don't eat dinner tonight, you're going to have that in the next little room. So please eat up and do a little bit more chit-and-chatting, and we'll be around. There are some resources up the front. These are just off my bookshelf that I thought were quite relevant to the perception of places and how they relate to politics. Everything from an autobiography of a tree right through to place-based education. Take a photo of these texts and ask me about some of the golden bits and pieces of them. I'd be happy to share.
If you'd like to, I've spent today scouring, YouTube, as I just talked about, trying to find some engaging clips that you could use throughout the VCE 3-4 units. So I've done exactly what I've said. I've made a resource sheet and included some academic readings in there as well, because I know that you don't have good access to those once you leave uni. So if you would like some resources that I think are worthy of sharing, just give me your email address and I'm happy to email around some resources. Particularly, most of them relate to politics in outdoor ed. So if you'd like that, feel free to write down your email and I will share my resources with you, just like I'm advocating for.
Thank you everyone for coming.
That's one thing you might be able to help me out here, help everyone else out. I'm going to Nurramunga on Sunday, and I know that you've got a lot of time there and some really great experiences. So, a lot of principals are scared, I guess, that they're sending their students out and they're not going to be able to assess them. So to make everybody happy, where the student's getting a lot out of it, the principal is also being able to see that something really great is happening there. What's something that you personally would run at Nurramunga with a bunch of Year 11 students, boys from St Kevin's, or any other group for that matter? But what is something that you would do personally at Nurramunga, because you really do have ties there, that would be a really good experience for the students, and the principal would say, good work, Beau, thanks for running that.
You could create a small film and show the small film. That's a lot of work though. You know, with this, that was probably 5 or 6 hours worth of work and 3 hours of shooting to get 10 minutes of mediocre filmmaking, you know. Look, there's so much, it's so weather dependent. That's the context place thing. Every trip I've ever run to Nuremberg is different based on the tide and the wind. And I suppose the speed of the group, you know, a group of 6 or a group of 12, whatever else. Your energy. So all the research in the world about outdoor education, nearly all roads lead to the leader, the facilitator, the key person that makes the key decisions when the students can't make them for themselves, which in a sea kayaking context takes years, really, particularly in that tidal zone. So your energy and what you can give to the experience is huge. If you go in there as a ball of energy with lots of knowledge and make great decisions, that rubs off on the students and so on and so forth. Their students will percolate through the school. If you want something a bit more permanent and a bit more, here's what I'm going to deliver at the end. I don't know, you and I can talk. We'll talk after this because there's some small little solutions that might be fun. Anything else, folks? Thank you very much. Yes.